Alchemy. Hey, good evening, everybody. This is John Michael, your favorite daddy warlock, and welcome to Stregoneria, Italian folk magic and inner alchemy. Tonight, we're going to take a look at some of your questions and maybe even chat a little bit about my new guilty pleasure on Netflix. Some of you, excuse me, already know what that is. So stick around and be sure to like and subscribe and all that stuff so you don't miss out on some of the incredible content that we've got planned for you in 2020. We'll be right back. And we are back. So tonight I thought I would answer some of your questions about Italian folk magic, Stregoneria, and whatever else happens to be in my inbox from this past month. I think it might be a great way to start off the month in which we celebrate Lupercalia. And as some of our magical brothers and sisters from other traditions are celebrating Imbolc and Candlemas, the Feast of Bridget, and many other rites related to pastoral magic, agricultural magic, and the coming of spring. So at spring, we set our intentions for the new year. We plant those seeds of our intentions, and so I thought this would be a great way. It's also coming as I'm finally getting over the pneumonia, which was a bitch, let me tell you. A little over 3 months of dealing with pneumonia and pleurisy, which landed me in the hospital twice. So it looks like we are at the tail end of that as the congestion's breaking up and no more fevers, no more infection. My labs look good. So let's go ahead and dive in. Now, the first question, hang on one second. I buried it. The first question comes from Lisa from Bergenfield, and she writes, in one of your daily broadcasts, I saw you say that you were not a pagan. I thought all witches were pagan. Could you explain? That's a fantastic question, Lisa, and thank you for that. So first of all, I think in order to understand that, and that's actually a pretty popular question that I get. In order to understand, first we have to understand the history of the word pagan in general. Now, there are some people who will tell you that the word pagan in Latin just means outlier or civilian, somebody living in the country outside of the city. And so there is this sort of neo-pagan imagination that says, oh, well, pagan means that we were the hedge witches, those who lived on the fringe, and so that's fanciful. It's kind of romantic, but it's not even remotely accurate. The truth is that there are no modern pagans alive today. There are no pagans alive today. There are neo-pagans, and that's where we need to understand some of the difference. So first of all, when pagan first began to be used as a description of those of us who practice some form of magic, it was used as a pejorative term by the Roman Catholic Church. And so we need to understand that the reason that that word came into use, that was taken out of the Latin vernacular, the word was used to describe those who were not part of the army of Christ. And therefore, they were civilians. And so they used the word in Latin, paganus, which means civilian. But it was a pejorative term. And so in the modern era, the members of the various neo-pagan movements began to adopt that, much like gay people have taken back the word queer to personally reclaim our empowerment and to show that we can't be harmed or hurt by that word. And so neo-pagans use that word and they call themselves pagan, and there's really absolutely no issue, or shouldn't be any issue, to anyone that they're saying pagan and not neo-pagan. We just need to understand that original pagan religions don't exist today. All we have is reimaginings of those traditions. And so paganism is a religion. It's based on the observations and the misconstrued ideas of people like the brilliant folklorist Charles Leland, who in his travels studied the various traditions, folklore traditions, and stories, mythos around the world. And in the course of that, Leland famously came to Tuscany. And in Tuscany, he encountered, or said that he encountered, someone called Maddalena, and she allegedly gave him a manuscript and invited him in to become involved with the Vecchia Religione. Now, you need to understand that I don't doubt that he was welcomed into the celebrations, that what we call the Boschetto, or the Grove, in which the Vecchia Religione was being celebrated, in which it was being observed, and I don't doubt that he saw rituals that occurred there. The problem is that he was told or imagined or somehow conflated the Vecchia Religione, and imagining even that it was even one religion. The old religion was multiple religions, but the Vecchia Religione, in his view, was the religion of the witches, and that is also patently false. Now, how can I say that? Well, I can say that from experience, and that's the only thing I can say that from. I could speak as someone who has a PhD in theological anthropology, and I could tell you all of the academic reasons why that doesn't make sense and why we can prove that that isn't true. But there have been books that have been written about that, and most of the people that watch my show are not remotely interested in things like the academic reasons why I don't believe that that's true. What I find more compelling is that, as we talked in a previous show, when I wrote my book, Magick at the Crossroads, I said multiple times throughout the book, this is based on my personal experience as someone who has practiced Italian folk magic for 50 years, who going on 51 now, who can only speak from my personal experience, because Italian folk magic and Italian witchcraft is not a homogenized or codified practice. It's as individual and unique as it was in the ancient world. So I can tell you that we just need to apply a little bit of logic to this, and I can speak from experience, having been involved with the old religions for 30 years. I can tell you what I experienced in those 30 years. Now, I've not been involved in the present day. I actually have no use or find zero value in religion and religious practices. I find zero value personally from paganism of any kind. But I can tell you that if we just stop to think about what Leland saw, he came into the grove, what we would call a coven was meeting, and there he may have very well encountered some people that he knew to be witches. But he saw the rituals that were being done in devotion to Diana and Dionysus. He saw the rituals that were being done in whatever that particular Sabbath was that he was viewing. And he imagined that this was a gathering of witches, the traditional story, the myth of covens. And so, excuse me, he said, well, this is clearly the religion of the witches. And that's how we got the Gospel of Aradia. Whether or not Maddalena gave that to him or passed it on to him, whether or not that was even an authentic manuscript or the creation of Maddalena or Leland, remains to be debated and seen. It's a beautiful story. It's just a very rich and wonderful mythos. I even include it in my book. so that folks have an idea of what this was that he saw and how he imagined that that must have been the religion of witches. But I want you to think in present day tense and think of a Catholic church or an Anglican church. Now, one might, who's never been to a Catholic church or an Anglican church, might walk into that church and they may encounter, among the first people that they encounter, if they get there early enough, they may encounter a priest. They may encounter nuns. They may see monks and sisters of religious orders there. Now, not everybody in a Catholic church is a monk or a nun or a priest or a bishop. Not everyone there is clergy. Not everyone there is religious. They also would have encountered, if they stayed in that celebration and got to know people long enough, a baker and a car dealer and maybe a school teacher, a housemaker, retired folks. They may have encountered people from every other walk of life. In fact, if you walk into a Catholic church or you walk into an Episcopal church, an Anglican church, the majority of the people that you will encounter statistically will not be priests or nuns or monks or bishops. In fact, the likelihood of you encountering those would be in the smallest of percentages, unless you happen to be at a monastery. So Leland walked into the Boschetto, he walked into the grove, and he encountered all of these people who were worshiping Diana and Dionysus. And maybe even the mention of Aradia was brought up in the rituals that he saw. It's doubtful, but perhaps. Leland presumed that that meant everybody there was a witch, but the truth was probably only the one or two people that invited him to be part of the Boschetto, who maybe have been presiding over the ceremonies, who may have studied ritual magic for a long time. Those folks may have been the ones who invited him, but the fact is that that was a religion he went to. That was the equivalent of a pagan church, an old religion celebration. And so the idea that everyone who practices witchcraft is pagan is false, because not everybody who practices witchcraft has any desire or interest or use for religion whatsoever. Now, in the modern era, we had people like Gerald Gardner, who based his practice of magic and his codification of magic, which became known as Wicca. We have this based on the conflation and the confusion, the misrepresentation that Leland passed on in his writings. And so that doesn't mean I don't respect Charles Leland. He was probably one of the most brilliant folklorists of all times. It doesn't mean that I'm disrespecting Gardner, but it doesn't mean that in reference to Italian folk magic, it doesn't mean that I'm disrespecting the late Raven Grimassi, who in his path created an entirely new tradition, what he called the Iridian tradition, and made up an imaginary religious tradition called Stregoneria, and claimed that that was what Italian folk magic has always been. In fact, he would go on to sort of malign the actual practice of Italian folk magic by saying Stregoneria was folk magic that was somehow blended with Catholicism, when in fact Grimassi's Stregoneria is Wicca with Italian herbs and seasonings. It's the practice of Wicca. It's based on the same misconceptions, and it's not something that one of my dear friends and mentors, Dr. Leo Martello, would refer to as Stregoneria. Leo never said that. He referred to this as the way of the strega. And growing up, we never even called it the way of the strega. It was just our way. It was our tradition. It was an Italian thing. Maybe if you referred to it formally, you might say Fallu Santucci, but that seldom was even used. And so I hope that makes sense. That's why I don't say that I'm a pagan. Now, that doesn't mean that I don't love pagans. Some of those people in my life who I hold most dear are pagan and are part of incredible pagan traditions, neo-pagan traditions. Some of them have even gone on to create their own traditions that are absolutely exquisite. It's just not my tradition. It's not my path. So for me, the path of Italian folk magic and conjure is my path. The shamanic path is my path. Those are not pagan traditions. So let's see. I hope that made sense. If you're watching, Lisa, shoot me a message and let me know. So the next question comes from Robert and Andy in West Hollywood, and I'm assuming that's West Hollywood, California. I don't know that Hollywood in Florida has a West Hollywood, but it could. So if I'm wrong, and if there's another West Hollywood, I apologize. So your question is, what is Lupercalia, and is that the same as Februalia and Imbolc? That's another good question and a timely question. So Lupercalia is the celebration that began in Etruscan times, long before the advent of the Roman Empire, where the ancient one, Lupercus, which we'll talk about in a second, whose golden light protects us from the wolves, is celebrated in gratitude for that protection from the wolves. Now, there's question about whether this is a pastoral celebration, so it could be protecting the flocks from literal wolves. It could be, hey Lisa, it could be protecting the people from the wolves in our society. But it was a pastoral celebration. It was a celebration, as I said, devoted to Lupercus, who was known by many names, including Pan, or the name that my family tradition would refer to him as Faunus, and many others. And in the Roman age, the festivals kind of got incorporated into the new mythos, which, you know, in the Roman, the rise of the Roman Empire, they always had to bring the Caesars into that and bring nationalism into that. And so it became, or incorporated into Lupercalia, was the tale of the she-wolf, who was said to have suckled Romulus and Remus, who went on to form the city of Rome. And although I suspect now the celebration, the cave where the Luperci, were the priests of Lupercus would gather, was to the northeast of Rome. And so I suppose there could have been some connections there to Romulus and Remus, but I suspect that a lot of that conjecture came about in the 17th and 18th century, where other fabrications, like the stories we just talked about with the Tuscan witches, and the horrors of the Benedenti, portraying themselves as the protectors of the people from the evil witches, and who, you know, created the imaginary enemy of the Malandanti. So I think a lot of those things arose in that, 16th, 17th, and 18th centuries. In my tradition, in my experience of the old religions, as I said, I've practiced those for nearly 30 years. We never once referred to the she-wolf during the story of Lupercalia. It was a festival that featured carnal delights. It was a festival in which those of us who were priests of the Lupercus would take the skin of goats or wild dogs made into a thong, and women wishing to become fertile would stand in the way of the priest, who would, process through town, usually in a bit of a drunken frolic. And they would stand in your way and ask us to, flog them, to gently hit their bellies with the fur, which was believed to make them fertile, and believed that they could conceive as a result of a blessing from Faunus. And so the festival would spread historically throughout the ancient world, and it would give rise to something called Februalia, which was a Roman festival, like I said, where they would incorporate all of these other motifs, and which was dedicated to Februs, the god for whom February is named. And that was all of these celebrations continued to be held between the 13th and 15th of February. And largely they remained connected with the pastoral and agricultural celebrations. And so we can see a tie-in in the idea of this being agricultural and pastoral celebrations as the traditions of paganism spread throughout the ancient world. And so there are some who believe that Imbolc in the Celtic world may have been influenced by Roman paganism. It may have been influenced by some Germanic traditions as well. And you know, the simple fact is that because enough written records don't exist, we can't be sure. But I will say that you know, it may have also, the Imbolc may have just arisen out of or organically among the Celts because it was their springtime as well. So you know, I've seen some of my brothers and sisters who practice the Celtic traditions, especially those who live on the other side of the pond, get their knickers in a knot at the suggestion that anything could have originated outside of their beautiful and blessed lands. So I don't want to get into a pissing match with people. That isn't my intention. I don't see a huge distinction between the Celts and the Italians and the Germanic tribes and you know, the British traditions, because we're all one people, and you know, our traditions, you know, have these connections. So, but for those who get their you know, nuts in a knot, that's I'm not going to get into into an argument, and that includes the Aridian tradition of Raven Grimassi, who claims that the Italians celebrated the Festa de Lupercus, which is really just the name that he gave to the feast. But his tradition, his celebration, is actually an Italian-American neo-pagan attempt to combine the old religion with the craft, and really to do an Italian, you know, an Italian version, Italian herbs and seasonings on Imbolc. And so I think that's another one of the areas where things get cloudy and muddied. Eventually, the Celtic festivals of Imbolc, the Feast of Bridget, would of course be co-opted by our friends in the Roman Church, and hey Ray, and they would syncretize those you know, traditional ancient celebrations into Candlemas and the Feast of Saint Bridget. They just would rip off the ancient goddess Bridget altogether and somehow turn her into a saint, and celebrate that about 2 weeks ahead of Lupercalia. So no matter what you celebrate at this time of year, just know that I wish you good tidings and passion and magical awareness, you know, and it's all good. So let's see, the final question I figured I would talk about tonight isn't one that I actually got in my email. It's one that came up on our Facebook groups, and that is people asking me what I thought about the new Netflix series Luna Nera. And I have to tell you, I am friggin' digging that series. I watched the Italian version of it, and then just today binge watched the English version, just to see if there was if I had missed any, you know, subtle, you know, nuances that might be present in the Italian version that aren't in the English version. I can tell you guys, don't sweat that. The English version is brilliantly done. It's dubbed, you know, over the original Italian. The scenery and the cinematography is absolutely breathtaking. It's worth it just for that. But it's really interesting, and there's this really cool tie-in to my book, and I'll talk a little bit about that. Yeah, so Ray, you watched the entire series. Yeah, it's just fucking amazing. I really loved it. So I would say that the interesting tie-in for me was, you know, as many of you know, part of my my personal experience was that the eldest in our tradition was expected to go into the priesthood and literally study with particular priests who were part of what we call the Benedicaria. Now, to the outside world, the Benedicaria, and I've gotten a lot of flack for talking about this, but I'm going to talk about it again. The Benedicaria appear to be those Italian folk magic practitioners who blend folk magic with Catholicism. And to the outside world, it looks just like that. What the Benedicaria actually were and are to this day are those practitioners who hide in plain sight some of the older practices and older traditions, syncretizing with some Catholic saints and Catholic traditions and Catholic stories. But the purpose for that, I had always considered to be like one of those myths that families tell you and that the old timers share. I kind of held it with some dubious disdain almost. Because the story was that, at one time in the ancient world, or the 17th century ancient world, that there was a horrible, depending on which one of the family members would tell you the story, they were either a bishop or a cardinal. And that bishop or cardinal was once part of the Streghe, and that they had been, taken in among the Streghe because he was an orphan. And the Streghe willingly and openly taught him everything that he knew and taught him our ways. And that this cardinal or bishop would go on to steal a specific text from our people. And that this was a very sacred text and a very powerful text and so on. And that the purpose of stealing the text was because he wanted all of the power. He was a misogynist. He didn't believe that women should be the most highly revered as they are in our tradition. He thought that it should be male power. And so it became this dichotomy of moon and water and sun and earth. So moon and water being our tradition and sun and earth being the male tradition, the tradition of the magician. So this cardinal would go on to create and fund with the church's money this group of mercenaries called the Benedante. And the Benedante were supposedly, in the eyes again of the public, they were seen as the witch hunters, and they would go out and torture and murder folks, again, just like in the burning times, who were accused of being witches and may not have been. But in our tradition, we do say that most of those that they rounded up were in fact witches. They were streghe, and what that really meant was that we were midwives, we were herbal healers, we were medicine men and shaman. We were we were people who did good among the people, but in doing good, we were giving the power to the people, and the church didn't like that. The church wanted to have the power. The church wanted to have the authority and wanted to be able to continue to manipulate. And so this movie, Luna Nera, does a brilliant job. And I don't want to give anybody spoilers of what I believe we may see coming, because at the end of this season, I suspect we might see what is going to be created by the church, by the Benedante, as an imaginary foe. Excuse me. They needed to have an enemy in order to be able to continue, because people were just watching them do crazy shit, attacking these people who were the midwives and the healers, and accusing them of being the ones that caused miscarriages and things like that. Well, they created something called the Malandante, which means they're the bad ones, and so it'll be really interesting to see what happens in season 2. But it was interesting for me because I always thought that story was, I'd never heard that story anywhere else. I've never seen it written down anywhere. And so, and all of the texts that I saw always portrayed the Benedante as being, good people and the Malandante being the bad witches. And so this mythology that Raven Grimassi and others have perpetuated was that the Benedante were the good Strega and the Malandante were the bad Strega. And we were told from the time I was a child that that was a lie, that the Benedante were horrible. They were to be, that we needed to have the eldest in every one of our families, our communities, to protect the practitioners from the Benedante, who were the Catholic clergy and their fundamentalist minions. And so I just thought that was just a story really to get me to go into the priesthood and become a benedicaria. And especially it seemed like it was just manipulating me because I was someone who always questioned religion. I loved spirituality. I questioned dogma. So the series is phenomenal so far. There are some, artistic licenses that take place, some, Hollywood effects that of course don't happen in the real world. But all in all, it's a well-told story. And whether it's true or not, or historical or not, that's really how our tradition lives, is through stories, well-told stories. And so Spring Al-Bassam says, what's the easiest way to get someone to leave you alone? Well, the easiest way is to tell them to leave you alone. But there are spells that you can do that are binding spells that I would, highly recommend. And depending on your tradition, there are different ways that you can do that. I would you recommend that you look for a simple binding spell, and that can be done as simple as simply as writing that person's name on a piece of paper and putting a cross, an X through their name, or tying that person's name on that piece of paper, and peeing on it and wearing it in your shoe. Simplest of methods to do that. But there are other binding rituals that you can do, including with candles. And I will tell you that one of the easiest ones from my tradition is to, and you can find this at just about any botanica or metaphysical bookstore. I can also tell you that Mystic Dreams, I believe in California, in Walnut Creek, may very well have these or know where you can get these. And that would be to get it. There are two candles that are joined by one wick. So they take a really long wick, and as they're making the candle, it's looped, and so they're connected. And you would inscribe on one candle your name, on the other candle the other person's name, and then you light the wick in the center. And the way that we do that is we light the wick with a paper that says, "I bind so-and-so to leave me alone." And you don't have to have any particular magic words. That remember that the magic takes place from your intentionality. And so you light that piece of paper and you hold it at the center of those of where that wick is connected to the two candles, and you say, whatever that person's name is, "Leave me alone." And when the wick burns and separates, you let the two candles burn completely down. And I can assure you that when your intention is straightforward, and you sit there with calmness, not anxiety about the person not leaving you alone, because that's giving energy to what you don't want. You're attracting more of what you don't want. Just say, "Leave me alone," and sit there and know that as those candles burn down, that person will be bound and kept from you. So I wish you well with that. I hope that's helpful. Guys, thank you. We try to keep these to about 30 minutes. I went a little bit over because I got a little excited about talking about Luna Nera. If you get a chance, watch it. It's on Netflix. I highly recommend it. And like I said, the really cool thing is that they do a fantastic job of dubbing it from the Italian to the English. So you can see on the screen down below ways that you can reach out to us, get in touch with us. On Twitter, you can get in touch with me by connecting to Gay Chaos Witch. On the web, we are at inneralchemy.online. That's www.inneralchemy.online. And you can also check out all of our videos by going to inneralchemy.online/YouTube. And as I said, please like and subscribe. We really appreciate when you do that. Tell your friends about us. And if you get an opportunity, I actually don't have the book sitting on my desk right now. It's on the bookshelf. But run over to Amazon, pick up a copy of Magick at the Crossroads, Italian Folk Magic and the Old Religions. I certainly appreciate your support. And until next time, I encourage you guys to stay in the moment. If you're celebrating Imbolc or Candlemas or the Feast of St. Bridget or Lupercalia, then I wish you a joyful celebration. I hope that you will plant the seeds of your intentions and know that those seeds will come to fruition. Stay in the moment, be grateful for what you've got. That opens the door for the abundance that's waiting for you. And always remember, the best is yet to come. I'll talk to you soon.